Hey there! Welcome to the latest episode of Behind the Bunny, the introspective, retrospective, and now prospective series dealing with everyone's favorite Thunder Bunny, Esther. For those of you that are new to the series, my name is Sartre BraveExvius, but you can simply call me Sart. It has been a while since my last episode, and a lot has happened since then. We saw the end to the Murder Bunny's Revenge series against Intangier EXT, as Esther passed the torch on to Red 13 to set off Nanaki's pride. That series ended with Esther rejoining the cast, along with Physalis and Charlotte, to create the Guardians of the Farplane, which is where I plan to keep more of my story-based content. If you enjoy my more creative content, then rest assured that I plan to do more with the Guardians of the Farplane series in the future. But for those of you that aren't a fan and would rather me just kick ass and take names, don't worry, Murder Bunny's Revenge will see a resurgence, and I'll get back to some good old-fashioned Murder Bunny action. Now, we got some great news this week. Esther is coming just in time for Easter. I was honestly surprised to see her come out on Easter weekend, but I wanted to throw together this little pre-work primer to get us ready for the Murder Bunny's return. Now, the question in all of our minds is, how is Esther going to fit in the Neo-Vision era? The landscape of the meta has changed drastically since I aired the first episode of Murder Bunny's Revenge back in May of last year. For better or worse, we now exist in the Neo-Vision era, and with it has come a great deal of different ways to increase our damage output. The NV era has also brought with it some unique and powerful gear that can even make older units look good. To that end, I'd like to take the first part of this episode comparing Esther from the past to an Esther right before her rework. In this way, I hope to provide a nice before snapshot so we can compare the difference between before and after her rework. Afterwards, I'll cover what we know of Esther's upgrades based on the in-game news that we received this week. I feel like they were being pretty cagey about her upgrades, honestly, focusing mostly on her TMR and her STMR upgrades, as well as her new Magnus ability, which honestly has me more concerned than excited at this moment. So with that, let me be clear about one thing. Don't get overhyped. We can get excited for a new and improved Esther, but let us not forget how we all felt about her enhancements last year. I say this more for myself than for anyone else, but I think it's important to remember that in the past, when we don't know what's coming, we often build these things up too much in our minds, only to be let down time and time again when the reality doesn't meet our expectations. This was certainly true when Esther got her enhancements a year ago, and I think we'd all like to avoid that this time around. Now, without further ado, let's take it back to where it all began. Those were simpler times, weren't they? When all you had to worry about was whether you remembered to put a pair of storm kickers on before you walked into a trial. The Demon Wall was Esther's first victim, and for that reason I've chosen it as the punching bag for this little pre-workout. This should give us the widest gap for the comparison between then and now. It also has a straightforward and predictable rotation, and it allows me more flexibility in demonstrating different loadouts, since Esther hits the killer cap so easily. Since Esther is almost exclusively a limit burst damage dealer, I'll be using that damage as my metric for comparison. With these Esthers, I was able to take down the wall in 9 turns back then. If we take the average of her LBs from this particular fight, we're looking at around 87 million per LB, with lows at around 77 million and the highest at 100 million. Now remember, this was from nearly a year ago, and the best builds for this job looked something like this. So these Esthers are sitting at just below 3000 attack, with around 200% passive limit burst damage boost, which is pretty good for back then, but do keep in mind that Esther hits the stone killer cap very easily. Didn't have to really use any materials to add stone killers to the build back then, so we could literally load her up with as much LB damage as we wanted. So what's really changed since then that allows Esther to do even more damage today before her rework? Let's take a look. So when I first started Murder Bunny's Revenge, the true double hand cap was stuck at 300%. It has since been raised to 400%, and this coincided with the release of Neovision back in September of last year. And it actually occurred while I was recording episode 22 of Murder Bunny's Revenge against Shinryu 2. And I think it really helped turn the tide against that particular trial. This allowed Esther to easily surpass the 3,000 attack threshold. Since that time, we've also seen a lot more limit burst gear and materia coming out in FFBE. Obviously with the Neovision era, a lot more units are using their limit bursts for massive damage, so it makes sense that you would get a lot more gear to come along with it. Some notable examples that have come out since the first episode of Murder Bunny's Revenge: CG Squall's TMR and STMR, both still great for any limit burst damage unit like Esther. Stern's STMR, if you're running the War of the Visions right now, try and grab that one. Won't necessarily use it on Esther because Esther would probably prefer her own STMR, but it could still work for Esther. Neovision Furion's STMR is superb on any limit burst damage unit, especially if they innately equip bows, but even sometimes if they don't. If you were lucky enough to pick up the Kingdom Hearts 3 units, Sora and Riku, their STMRs and TMRs were fantastic. And then Neovision Rain and Fina's STMR is pretty godly on a unit like Esther, who likes to equip great swords, since it also comes with 100% limit burst passive boost, which is just insane. Most recently, we saw the introduction of an increased chain cap. We know that true dual-wield units already have the increased chain cap up to 6x above the normal 4x chain cap, but now we have the possibility of actually increasing the chain cap for TDH units to go above their 4x chain cap. Currently only two sources available: the chain comprehension materia, which was given away for free a few weeks or a month ago or so, increases it to 4.5x, but even more highly coveted would be Neovision Lightning's STMR, which increases it to a 5x chain cap for TDH units. It doesn't increase it at all for TDW units. That hard cap is at 6x, but for TDH units, this is a great way to basically gain an edge over TDW units. And this marks the beginning of units actually having this innately in their kits. Neovision Lightning has this ability innately in her kit, and so if you actually put her own STMR on her, it stacks, so she has a 6x chain cap, just like a true dual-wield unit, except she's TDH and thus gains the advantage of weapon variants on top of that increased chain cap. Really makes TDH units a lot more viable and could really improve Esther's damage. So the question I know you're asking is, how much stronger is she now? Well, let's take a look, strapping in some of this new and exciting gear to see what she can do today. Today, it's much easier for Esther to reach both the TDH cap and well over 200% LB damage boost with the amount of gear that we have at our disposal. This allows for a much wider variety of builds for Esther, and I've rerun this trial with a few of them to see if we can gauge not only how much more damage we're doing now, but what gear we should prioritize for a unit like Esther. Keep in mind, this is just me playing around with builds as she is now, and should certainly not be taken as gospel, especially since we have no idea what passives the reworked Esther will have in her kit. Also, if you really want to get down to brass tacks, then I highly recommend you use Lyreguard's builder at FFBEequip.com, as it will give you a much more precise calculation of the average difference in the damage between the various builds I'll be showing you. For these test runs, I'm going to look solely at the differences between gear on my friend units. My Esther will remain constant with the following build. This has been my standard bearer build for Esther since the end of Murder Bunny's Revenge, and is the same build that you can find on my favorite slot if you happen to be a friend of mine on FFBE. Ever since I got Lionheart Plus, that's pretty much lived on Esther unless I needed her to use something else. It comes with 50% 2DH and 25% LB damage. Erdwin's Coronet is the only hat that I know of that provides LB damage at 20%. Of course, wearing 2 of her Storm Kickers, each contributing 15% LB damage, as well as that Storm Bunny jacket. As for the materials, we've got Original Squalls STMR, Alliance Heart. We've got CG Squalls TMR, the mightiest. We've got True Hero, which is Zack's STMR. And then, of course, we have Neovision Lightning's STMR, which adds that 100% onto the chain cap, which should provide a nice little boost for my Esther. So as it stands, she's capped out on attack, TDH, and is at 230% LB damage boost. Friend I'm bringing for round 1 is a new recruit to the Murder Bunny army named Swafnir, who's brought a very beastly bunny to this particular fight. He's rocking the sword bow of Unbreakable Faith, which is Rain and Fina's STMR. That's that 184 attack greatsword with 100% LB passive boost. Just insane amount of passive LB boost there. Otherwise, pretty standard build with just lots of high attack gear. His materials, he's also rocking Sora's, Neovision Sora's STMR, which gives 80% attack passives as well as 75% limit burst damage boost. So with this, he's able to hit an attack of over 3,600 attack, as well as cap his LB damage at 300%, which is quite nice. The only thing missing is Neovision Lightning's STMR, so he doesn't have the increased chain cap, but we'll see that it still is going to do a pretty good improvement on her damage. So, round 1, let's get to it. My next guest is Razgriz, who has been with me since the very beginning. It would feel wrong not to have him in this video. So he has also brought a bunny build that includes the sword bow. But you'll notice his attack isn't quite as high, and that's okay because in his materia, he has included the chain comprehension materia, which, if you remember from earlier, increases his chain cap to 4.5x. Not as good as Envy Lightning's STMR, but let's see if it actually helps him out with the lower attack. Still hitting 300% LB passives on this build. So, round 2, let's get to it. Lastly, we have the whale to my pilot fish, Sure. Sure is probably most famous for his appearance in episode 16, where we took down Bloody Moon together. Sure always has a habit of building some pretty crazy bunnies, and in this case, he doesn't disappoint. This is the one of only 2 of my murder bunny friends who's able to build an Artemis bunny with Firion's bow, which is pretty crazy. It actually works in this case because Esther hits the killer caps, so she doesn't need room in the materia slots for it, so might as well slap an equip bow, give her the Firion's bow, and, let's see how it goes. This build only has 250% LB passives, but he is running with NV Lightning's STMR, so he has the 5x chain cap. Let's see how this does. Round 3, let's get to it. So that's a pretty nice boost in power over the course of a year just in the gear that we've accumulated. But gear's not the only thing that's improved since then. We've also gotten some really neat and new support abilities, sometimes from support units, but also from the damage dealers themselves. So let's take a look at some of these things and how those have improved damage over time. Elemental amps were a new thing that was added just before the Neovision era started, and this increases your damage when you're using a specific element by a given percent. Usually it's somewhere between 15 and 25%. We did see a recent global exclusive unit in Venera who has a 50% dark elemental amplification, which is just stupid, but they can go as high as that, I guess, now. They are commonly found on support units and damage dealers these days. We've also seen higher active limit burst damage boosts, both on the support units and on damage dealers themselves. Support units now give between 100 and 150% AoE LB damage boost. We got the free unit Lumina from the Neovision Lightning event that gives an AoE 150% limit burst damage boost, and it has 100% uptime, which is pretty crazy. Damage dealers that use their LBs a lot commonly also bring their own active LB buffs. Some as high as 300%, again from the most recent global exclusive Neovision unit, Venera, who has a 300% limit burst damage active buff. Just crazy. Lastly, we've seen the introduction of weapon imperils, which basically just means an additional break against the enemy's defenses when you're using a specific weapon type. Some of the notable examples are Realm's 35% rod imperil. So if you're using rods, you're a mage, you use rods, then that'll deal 35% more damage. Neovision Awakened Edgar's 25% spear imperil on his limit burst, and the recent Neovision Awakened Lightning's 35% gun imperil are some other notable examples. We don't currently have a great sword imperil yet in global, which would be nice for Esther to do a little bit more damage. I doubt she's going to get it in her revamped kit, but you never know. So how much do all these extra support abilities actually increase the damage? Well, let's figure that out. We're going to use the exact same build from Sure, just so we have a direct comparison from the last run to this one. And let's see just how much more damage this does and how much faster we can take down the wall. So that's it. Esther's last hoorah in her old form. That is the strongest I can possibly get Esther before her rework. Every day from this day forth will be a new day and a new Esther. So now I'll just send you off with a brief overview of everything we know before maintenance, but I'll save the in-depth analysis for next week's episode of Behind the Bunny, after I've had a chance to play around with the new kit. So, let's get into it. After the news video earlier in the week, I was left a little unsatisfied with how little they talked about Esther's improvements. But then we were given a laundry list with the in-game news on Tuesday. Basically, every one of her abilities is getting some kind of upgrade. While this certainly shines a positive light on some aspects of what I had hoped to see, there's still a lot left to be said. We didn't get any kind of hard numbers except in one case, which makes it difficult to tell if her improvements are going to be any good. This isn't unusual, however. We've never been able to see the numbers until the data starts coming in during maintenance. If you follow the BraveExvius subreddit or their Discord server, you'll be able to get a sneak peek at the numbers before maintenance is over. First, I want to mention her TMR and STMR, which both got some nice little upgrades. Her TMR will get a 6-point flat attack bump going from 45 to 51, as well as an extra 5% LB damage for a total of 20%. This is now probably the best non-limited TMR for physical LB damage units in the game. Her STMR simply gets some flat stat boosts with an extra 100 HP and 15 attack for a total of 900 HP and 55 attack. Nothing else changes here, but if you're using 2 storm kickers and a bunny jacket like I am, then that 27 extra attack gets amplified by her TDH passive up to 400%, meaning we actually get a nice 135 point boost to her attack. Not too shabby. Now let's quickly run down the list of her abilities, and I'll explain what I think we can decrypt from their verbiage. Let's start with her limit burst. Thank the goddess it is not locked to lightning. I was genuinely concerned about this due to the tendency towards Neovision units to be forced into element boxes for their hardest hitting skills. This is a weight off for me personally. Nothing else really changes in the language here, it reads exactly as before. We can assume the mods are higher, as well as the attack and LB buffs, but that's it. Next, we have her ability Shock Flash. The only difference in the language here is that it is now an AoE attack, and the LB fill now applies to all allies instead of just herself. If the mod boost is decent, then this could be a nice support ability for the team. Nothing else shaking here. Her breaks, Shatter Arms and Shatter Guard, will likely see some higher break numbers, but I would be surprised if they made her breaks relevant to the meta, which today would have to mean 80% or higher really. Nothing else to report here. Shock Reflex is her HP drain ability, and nothing to add to it based on the language. Expect a mod boost and that's it. Next up is Charged Protection, which I honestly never used until the last episode of Nanaki's Pride, but it's a neat part of her kit, giving her 1 turn of AoE physical cover. Since Esther easily reaches full evasion, she could be an emergency AoE cover tank in certain situations, but this has almost never happened in practice. The only thing different in the language here is the reduced damage taken for the caster at the end. They'll have to make the mitigations and defense boost stupidly high to make it worth it to use in today's meta, and they'll also need to make it more than 1 turn duration. Moving on, we have Overcharge. The language is exactly the same as it is now, as long as you enhanced this ability last year. I can only assume they plan to boost some of the passives here. Nothing else to report. Stormbrand actually has an exciting little addition to the language. This ability now gives Esther an on-demand lightning elemental amplifier. We don't know how much of an amp, but it's nice to know it's always there when we need it. Other than that, it reads exactly as it did before. Static Barrage is going to turn Esther into this month's Arena Cancer. This is her counter ability that comes with DR chains. This ability actually helped Esther beat Scorn of Shinryu in 23 turns instead of 24 after she counter-slapped the dragon to death. Now we can expect some mod boosts, maybe boost to the full break, but most importantly, it's AoE attack instead of single target. This means if you go up against a team of Esthers in Arena, they have the potential to chain you to death if you don't kill them on turn 1. If you see me in Arena, run. Now, a magnetic grip comes with an awesome bit of real data with actual numbers. Esther will receive a static 500-point attack boost, which means it isn't affected by your passives, but if they also happen to bump up her base stats a little bit, this could actually help her break 4,000 attack for the average player. Other than that, the ability appears to remain the same, although we don't know how much innate TDH she'll end up with. Storm Calling is one of her AMOE chaining skills, and was useful back in the day for chaining partners that didn't have Bolting Strike. Not sure if they'll keep this chain family, but I don't see any reason why not, as AMOE is still a widely used chain family today. I wouldn't expect anything more than a mod boost to this ability. Next is Phase Shift, which is another all-around increase in stat passives, as well as her evasion passive. Nothing new in the language, but we can assume all of these will see some higher boosts. Stasis Bound was actually an ability that I used once in a while, certainly more than I used her AoE cover. It still looks like it's stuck at 2 turns, which sucks, but what are you going to do? It also comes with racial mitigations to machines and humans? What? I understand machines, and I would have understood stone monsters, but humans? Whatever. Moving on. Demagnetizing Strike was one of her prime chaining abilities, along with Bolting Strike. Both have always had the same modifier, except this is single target, and Bolting Strike is AoE. Demagnetizing Strike is also her primary imperiling move, so while I'm sure it will see some mod boosts, I also hope they boost the imperil. If not 130%, then maybe 125%? Wishful thinking, I'm sure. Electric and Tempest Charge are her double and triple cast abilities, respectively. My hope was that she would get T-cast permanently, and I think she will. We can only hope that she'll be able to T-cast all of her abilities and not just a select few. Combat Overdrive used to be the move that unlocked her T-cast. We don't see that language here anymore, which I'm taking as further evidence that Esther will have permanent T-cast. Otherwise, this ability reads the same as it did before. Ancient Figure reads almost the same as before except the ending. She now gets an auto attack buff and lightning amp at the start of battle and after being revived. We don't know how high the buffs are or how long it lasts yet, but this is still pretty cool. Shock Embrace was her turn 1 setup skill, usually coupled with Combat Overdrive. It used to be a 5-turn cooldown, but now it's only 4 turns. It reads exactly the same as before, except it now gives her 5 stacks of Mirage instead of 3. We can hope the Imperil is higher than its original 120%, but we don't know for sure. Storm Clouds is her other AMOE skill, but on a cooldown. It used to be 4 turns, now it's only 3 turns. Other than that, it reads exactly the same as before, but I assume we'll see a mod boost on this, hopefully a significant boost since it's on a cooldown. It would be nice to actually use this ability, as I never, ever used it before. I never even bothered to enhance it. And of course, we have Bolting Strike, her signature ability that started the most famous and most user-friendly chain family in FFBE. The language reads the same, but I'm hoping it gets a good mod boost and maybe even a higher defense break to go with it. Lastly, we have her new Magnus ability, Shock and Awe. All we know about it is that it gets 3 uses per battle, gives a lightning amp, LB active buff, an LB fill, and deals damage with Bolting Strike chain frames. We can assume that since it's a limited use ability that the active buffs will be pretty significant, perhaps a 30% or higher lightning amp and hopefully a 200 or 250% LB damage buff. We'll just have to wait and see what we get. So with that, we say goodbye to the old Esther. And when she wakes up tomorrow, she'll begin a new chapter in the story of her life. I've waited patiently for the moment that Esther awakens, and I'm excited to see all the places I can take her. I hope you'll follow us on this journey, as it's sure to be an exciting one. We'll see you all on the other side.
There's a rhythm and rush these days, where the lines don't move and the colors don't fade. Leaves you empty with nothing but dreams, in a world gone shallow, in a world gone mean. There is a truth and it's on our side. Dawn is coming, open your eyes. Look into the sun as a new day's rise.